bulkhead is often a place where we have a lot of water issues amongst all different types of homes. If you think about it, it's your direct access from the outside to the inside, usually with some sort of subgrade structure and then also some door structure up top. There are multiple different types of bulkheads, and I kind of want to cover just kind of the basic ones and where they tend to fail and have water entry. On newer homes, you're going to have a concrete construction type of bulkhead. Typically, it's either going to be precast, where it is something that's manufactured and dropped in place, or they're going to actually be a poured in place bulkhead, which is actually part of the existing foundation. They just bump out a section and pour those 4 or 3 walls. Those are the least concerning because it's just typically like a foundation. So usually you see some cracks in there. Sometimes it's where the floor and the wall meet that you have some issues. And those ones typically are the least problematic ones in general. The precast bulkheads are the most common type that we see in anything that's been built any time after, let's say, 1970. And what that is that, you know, the house is existing. They put the 4 walls, we'll call it, of the foundation. They cut open a hole, or they leave a hole or a gap open, and they drop a pre-manufactured concrete stair assembly and bolt it to the foundation. And where they bolt it to the foundation, they'll install a sealant that goes between it, almost like an O-ring or a gasket. And what happens is that tends to rock over the years because it's not actually part of the house. So it's susceptible to how they backfilled it, any sort of freezing and thawing cycles, and that rocking motion breaks down the sealants between the existing foundation and the precast bulkhead. So when we see basement water problems, a lot of times it's at the bulkhead area, and more often than not, it's that sealant that has gone. Now that can be resolved through an injection process, but the problem with even with an injection process is that you could still have excessive movement if the compaction of the soil wasn't great. So more often than not, that injection will get it, but there are extreme examples where you have just so much movement that you have to look at doing some drainage around the actual bulkhead. Moving away from the concrete bulkheads, you get into the older homes. So older homes will have either a block structure bulkhead that has been cinder block constructed, or it could be a stone foundation where it's actually a stone bulkhead base with a cap on top. Those are very tricky, especially the blocks and the stones, because they're dynamic, right? They're constructed with individual pieces. They're not one pour, they're not one slab. And so you have multiple points of entry. Oftentimes it's about reestablishing the mortar joints, targeting specific areas where the water is coming in. A lot of times it's water coming up and underneath the bulkhead itself, so some pumps might be needed to be installed in there. And the ones that give me the most headache, and unfortunately the biggest issue for homeowners, is there was a very small period in somewhere between the 60s and mid-70s where metal inserted bulkheads were used. And it would be a metal structure very similar to a precast concrete bulkhead, but the whole metal frame is down below ground. And unfortunately, with years of exposure to moisture and air on the other side, you have rusting occurring. And that rusting just can't be resolved. So a lot of times you're talking about a full replacement. Sometimes you can do some very simple patching, but more often than not, it just finds another weak point in the metal. So unfortunately for very few homeowners, but it does happen, you know, occasionally, is you'll have a metal frame bulkhead that is below ground. The other area where bulkheads will leak is that the doors up top. A lot of times that's more about aligning the doors properly, or where the actual sealant is, where it sits on top of the structure that's below ground. So very simple test to give for people is to understand how and where the bulkhead's leaking, because usually you'll go downstairs and you'll just see water on the floor, or not exactly sure how it came in. It's really important to see, is it coming down the stairs from the top? If that's the case, usually it's the doors being misaligned, or the bulkhead structure not being sit perfectly on the actual concrete structure. Or is it coming just where the floor and the wall meet at the very bottom, where it's attaching to the house? And a simple test is taking a garden hose and letting it run on the corners on the exterior of the bulkhead where it attaches to the house. Let it run for 20 minutes on, 10 minutes off, repeat that cycle a couple times, and that way you can really test to see if it's the joints of the bulkhead or if it's over the top of the bulkhead by just spraying the top doors to see if it comes through the door assembly. So sometimes it involves just minor adjustments to the doors. Sometimes it involves injection processes to see how the water comes in. Or sometimes it involves a sump pump underneath the stairs, depending on how the water comes in, the whole thing. So when we talk about bulkheads, it is a common point of failure for water coming in, but it's also very important to know what it is, how it's constructed, and where the failure points typically are, because the approach for waterproofing it can vary wildly depending on what specific structure you have and how we need to approach it. So these are the questions that we will ask. Usually photos are extremely helpful, just so we can see what did they do in this particular house, because we don't want to put a sump pump in somewhere where an injection process is the right case, or we don't want to repoint a foundation where an injection process is the right case. So it's really important to know what it is and how we approach it.